38 yaşında ama dünya çapında çok sayıda spor konusunda, ekonomi konusunda, siyaset konusunda ve bunun sporla, futbolla birlikteliğini, politikaya olan katkılarını futbolun derinlemesine değerlendirmiş, çok değerli yayınlar yapmıştır. Please proceed. Thank you. Opening speech.
It's okay. I want to thank Fenerbahçe for inviting me and for hosting this remarkable conference. I've never heard of a football club staging a conference like this, and it's a very welcome sign. Here at last there's a club that's thinking hard about football, not just about the football that's played on the field, but also about the social meaning of the game. I've always believed that when a sport matters to billions of people, it becomes more than just a sport, and Fenerbahçe recognizes this. And by the way, today I'm going to mispronounce every single Turkish name. Please forgive me, I apologize in advance. I understand Fenerbahçe is doing well on the field as well as off it. I was actually here last year, soon after the World Cup, when you played your Champions League qualifying match against Dynamo Kiev. This may not be a very happy memory for you. My memory, it was a nice young team, some pretty moments. Unfortunately, of course, you lost. But now I gather you have a wonderful and very Brazilian team. Normally I'd say good luck for your next match against CSKA Moscow. But actually, as the professor said, I grew up in the Netherlands, I support Dutch clubs, so part of me hopes that PSV Eindhoven will do well as well next week. Perhaps it's better if we say nothing more about this. In any case, I'm always very happy to be in Istanbul. I first came here in 2001. I've been back many times since, sometimes as a tourist, sometimes to write about your football. I always have a very good time here. The only thing I don't like, I should say, is the long queues for foreigners at Ataturk Airport, but the food, the weather, the friendliness, the beauty of Istanbul, all compensate. Today I want to talk about football, but about something that's larger than football, about what football tells us about the relationship between Turkey and Europe. Now, as we know, this relationship has been hotly debated in recent years. But I don't think anyone has asked what football can tell us about the relationship between Turkey and Europe. And that's what I propose to do here today. As a journalist, I've always thought that by studying a country's football, you can learn something about that country. And so it is with Turkey. First, I want to talk a little bit about what the West, and particularly what Britain, thinks about Turkey, what prejudices there are in my country, Britain, first of all. I know that to talk about what a nation thinks about another nation is very generalizing, but there are some prejudices that are quite widespread in a country, in Britain, about you. And I want to discuss these because it's in football, which is the place where millions of people show their emotions, as we know, that we can perhaps see those anti-Turkish prejudices most strongly. And I want to take you back to October 2003, to the football match that you'll probably all remember, in the Fenerbahçe Stadium, the Turkey-England football match. It was a very important qualifier for Euro 2004, and you'll remember some of the emotions that surrounded that match. There had been problems between English and Turkish fans before. In 1993, Manchester United fans coming here to Istanbul, greeted by what has become a very famous banner in Britain. It was at the airport and it said in English, "Welcome to the hell." Now, of course, this was bad English. It should really have said, "Welcome to hell," but it resonated in some way with the British stereotypes of Turkey, and it got remembered. On that same visit, many Manchester United fans got into trouble with police, and a few years later, in 2000, when Leeds United visited Istanbul, their fans behaved extremely badly. They urinated in public, they exposed themselves to Turkish women, and at some point during Leeds' visit here, 2 of their fans were stabbed to death by Turks. So going into that 2003 match, there was an ugly history in football between England and Turkey. We're all friends, so we can discuss this. Going into that match in 2003, Sven-Göran Eriksson, who was then manager of England, advised English fans not to travel to Istanbul for the game because, he said, You can risk being hurt. You can risk your life. The British media mostly believed him, and it indulged in hysteria about the terrible dangers of Istanbul life. So one typical headline in a British daily newspaper in those days was "Turkish hell awaits England." There was a Sunday newspaper, which I used to write for, as the professor has said, which headlined its reports on Turkish fans, "Natural born crazies." And it's worth saying both of these were what we in England call quality newspapers. The tabloid newspapers, which is what we call the popular press, are rather more hysterical. Now this British media hysteria didn't actually reveal that much about Turkey. As you know, as I know, Istanbul is not hell. It's not even the hell. But the hysteria in the British media, which was generated by a football match, does tell us something about Western prejudices about Turkey. To understand British prejudices in particular about Turkey, there's one very important film that you should see. It's not a good film, it's not an admirable film, but it's a film that did a lot to shape Western attitudes to your country. And the film I'm talking about is Midnight Express, which is a Hollywood movie from 1978, directed by the famous British director Alan Parker. Now, Midnight Express is based on a real-life story, the story of the suffering of Billy Hayes, who was an American arrested here in 1970 for smuggling hashish, the drug. If you watch the film Midnight Express, you start to believe that Turkey really is hell. Because the film shows Hayes, the drug smuggler, spending 5 years in a Turkish prison in what he calls an environment of hellish squalor. Every Turk that Hayes meets in the film is bad, and the film really sums up two very popular British beliefs about abroad. Abroad is the place you go for hedonism, to break all the rules, but it's also a place of dangers where people are out to get you. Now, of course, Midnight Express stood in an ancient British tradition of stereotypes about Turkey. Some of those stereotypes date back hundreds of years to the medieval crusades of Christians against Muslims. But the film was seen by so many people in Britain that it became the modern British stereotype of Turkey. The way many Brits think about Turkey is inspired more by Midnight Express than as it was by the many crusades. Alan Parker, the director who was able to shape British notions of Turkey, actually later apologised for some things in the film. But the reason his film was so powerful was because few Britons have many other experiences of your country. Turkey did not participate in the Second World War, which is really the only historical event that most Britons know about. And only in the last few years have Britons begun coming to Turkey in large numbers for holidays. Until the 1990s, Turkish teams really played football against English teams, and that's important because it's the easiest way for a foreign country to get into British newspapers. And so most Britons, and indeed most Westerners, don't really know much about Turkey, which is partly because of your impenetrable language. I'm very grateful to the excellent interpreters here who I've been listening to. So much of what Britons learn about Turkey, they learn from Midnight Express, and they learn from football, because football is a way of teaching Britons about foreign countries. There's a famous saying that war is God's way of teaching Americans geography, and on the same lines, football is God's way of teaching Britons about other countries. When English teams did start coming to Turkey, English fans experienced problems that sometimes made them feel that Midnight Express might have had a point. I talked about that Manchester United visit here in 1993. Well, many of their fans were arrested by Turkish police who behaved with a sort of violence and insensitivity that reminded them of Midnight Express. One United supporter, John Cunningham, would later say of that visit, and I quote it because it's an instructive quote. Cunningham said, "Everyone's mind's on Midnight Express, obviously. So on the way to the jail, I laid out some ground rules. I said, whatever happens, stick together. If one fights, we all fight. Otherwise, we're gone." Now, this man, a United fan, is speaking obviously totally in the grip of stereotypes about Turks. And then, when Leeds came here in 2000, the worst happened, 2 fans were killed.